Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. Well, rather overshadowed by Teddy Roosevelt on D-Day, the 4th Infantry Division was ably commanded by Raymond Barton. To talk about his career before, during, and even after World War II, we welcome back Dr. Bourque with his new book entitled Tubby, which is, of course, in the links below. I'll bring him in. Good afternoon, Stephen. How are you today?
I'm doing, Paul. Great, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we were just saying, of all the people who were monumental figures on D-Day, commanding an assault division on a beach, we don't talk about Barton enough. I mean, we had this conversation in a restaurant when you were beginning this project. Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah.
How has it taken 80 years before there's been a notable work about this important figure?
Well, that's the thing I think to start off is that I'm amazed. I was actually going to start writing this thing because my original book, my dissertation, all was on Desert Storm. 7th Corps on Desert Storm. And so I got done with some other Desert Storm era books, and then my book on bombing, which we talked about a couple of years ago on this station. And then I said, I want to get back to my roots, my ground roots. I deal Corps, large unit operations, Corps division, higher level operations. I want to get back to that level. And so I started looking at the 7th Corps in World War II. That was my project, 7th Corps in World War II. And I couldn't get past Joe Collins. Joe Collins sucks all the life out of everything. And so I finally found out, his chief of staff, who, by the way, is freaking brilliant. I mean, if you look at this chief of staff from D-Day all the way through September, and that includes Cobra and the capture of Cherbourg, his chief of staff, Richard G. McKee, he's the guy that synchronizes plans, lays everything out, and Collins hates him for a number of different reasons. He's put there by Hodges and Bradley to keep an eye on him because we could talk later. Collins essentially gets fired in the Pacific. Gets essentially said, you're never getting a Corps here, and he's rescued by George C. Marshall, brought back and given to Eisenhower. But to keep an eye on him, Hodges put McKee as his chief of staff. And so anyway, I'm digging into this thing. As I'm digging into it more, I finally actually make contact with his daughter, which is fascinating. She had a bunch of stuff, but nothing that really could help. But he ended up going on to become the 8th Infantry Commander, 8th Infantry Regiment Commander. And so I start digging again, and I look up, and he's working for Barton. So I do a simple check on Barton and find out there's nothing on the guy. He shows up on the longest day. And O'Brien walks on down to, Henry Fonda walks on down to O'Brien, who's playing Barton. They talk for 2 minutes, and it looks like it's on the ship just as they're getting ready to land, which is hogwash. It was done, weeks before that. And that's it. D-Day takes place. I mean, Barton's on the beach. Nothing about him. So I'm going, holy mackerel. So I start digging and digging and digging, and I end up coming across some material. So when we move ahead a little bit, I'll tell you what I ended up finding, which is kind of fascinating.
Well, we'll bring up your PowerPoint and we'll hand it to you. And so let's start. So here we go.
Yeah, move on to the next one, and let's talk this next one here. So everybody has, every historian who writes about World War II has access to these kind of papers. The unit records. They have everything. The ones I like are the one that's bottom right-hand corner right there is the unit log. That's written by an E2, E3 clerk typist typing that thing in with a sergeant or a lieutenant standing there next to it. It's the best primary source you can ever have. Nobody's edited it. And then you get spot reports. Same thing, spot reports and situation messages, reports at the actual orders. But everybody has this material. So it's nothing unique. So I had that stuff on McKee too, but I couldn't take it not enough. So let's go one more. So I end up searching, and I end up making contact with his grandchildren. His grandson had already taken a bunch of stuff and moved it away and squirreled it away. They retired in Augusta, Georgia. He was able to get a number of stuff out of the house, and a number of family members lived in the house for the next couple of years. So he's able to get that stuff. But then the big thing that takes place, about 2005, his granddaughter gets a call. And that the last person in the house, who was a deceased grandson's wife, is literally throwing stuff out. She gets a call by a fellow realtor. She comes rolling on over, and there are all these letters going like up the right. They go all the way, or like in the center. 1908, he's just arrived at West Point. I mean, a stash of letters that were just amazing. I got on down there. My wife and I got on down there, and we have just this little sports car, you know. And she says, "Well, you can take this stuff. You can take this back and get it back to me." Of course, we have no trunk space, right? So we literally take our clothes and take them over to UPS, that did deliver, by the way, take them over to UPS and put the rest of these things in plastic bags and throw them in. So now I've got his records, the papers that he wrote, letters he wrote from before 1908 to his parents all the way until 1943. I mean, what an incredible collection of stuff. So now I've got all kinds of background material. I've also got letters that are written by members that he gets from other people, like Ted Roosevelt's wife, Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway. I mean, all kinds of Hemingway's with the 4th Division for a bunch of times. So all this stuff is now in this collection. But there's one more thing that made this a really doable project. Go ahead, flip the next one, Paul. His personnel record survived. And if people who know that in 1973, there was a massive fire in St. Louis, just a massive fire. About 80% of all those World War II records for the Army went up in smoke. Barton's survived, to include all of his medical records, all of his efficiency reports, all of his orders. I mean, all of his special letters and notes, and when he applies for this, it's all there in his file, going all the way back to the day he graduates from West Point. So when I lay this all out, talking to my editor, he goes, "Yeah, it's a biography time, man. You got to write a biography."
See, I'm just gonna have to add in how jealous I am, because I'm working on 8th Corps in Normandy, and Middleton, I'm struggling to find anything of the measure you've got on 7th Corps and Barton. It's you can only work with what you've got. I've got other sources, but yeah, sorely lacking. With
this catcher material, I've got actually 3 projects lined up that will be based on this incredible amount of material. I mean, I could keep going on for the rest of my life. I'll be doing little Barton things cranked up because it has so much material.
Brilliant stuff. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Let's start at the
beginning. August 22nd. So his father is Conway O. Barton, and he was from Texas. Cameron, Texas. His 3 uncles all fought for John B. Hood's Texas Brigade. So anybody in this group who's watching does any Civil War history, that was one of the most bloodiest units of all. I mean, they were something else. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. One of his brothers lost a leg, but they all survived. Slave owners, the whole bit. He ends up going to the University of Virginia Law School after the Civil War, and he ends up going there, getting a law degree, coming home and starts doing the law thing. Marries a gal from St. Louis. They have 2 children, but sadly, his wife dies in childbirth with the second daughter. He's devastated, so he leaves the kids with his in-laws, comes back, has no heart at all for continuing to do law at this time. So he ends up becoming a stringing telegraph line. And I've got a picture here of the area of the part of the Santa Fe Trail where it heads south and everything. Right there in the southeastern corner of Colorado, he starts stringing line and stuff. And one day he walks into this town of Granada. He's out looking for food, for supplies for his team. He walks in and he comes across this young lady working behind the counter, and it's Carrie Mosher. And of course, that she courts him, and her joke is always she had so many men, after her that she kept turning them down, but she chose Conway. And of course, one of the reasons is Conway was educated. He had a degree. He was a pretty smart guy. So they end up marrying, and they end up living at La Junta is actually where he was looking for supplies, which is further west a bit. But in Granada is where he was based out of, and they get married. And in August 1889 is when Barton is born, Raymond O. Barton. Now, every official document, so this is one place where we start with differing from the typical reports, because all of his reports say from Colorado. No, he was born in Colorado, and then he moves on. So they start moving on from there. So go ahead and flip another one. After moving around a bit, they end up in the town of Ada, Oklahoma. That's southeast of Oklahoma City. It's a rough town. This is a rough town. So you can see it. They've just taken the land back from the Cherokee or from one of the tribes there. So it's now they sort of repartitioned it. And so he will be in the valedictorian for the first high school class in Ada, Oklahoma, which is kind of cool. Graduates, there are only about 8 of them, but he graduated in 1807. So that's where he goes. He goes to the University of Oklahoma for a little while, but he wanted to go to one of the service academies. His father was a mayor for a while, not just a judge, but he was a mayor and political connections. And so he's then able to get into West Point. Yeah, and so there he is. He's the class of 1912. Interesting, guys. Interesting, by the way, is that they about 32% of this class, it's a very small class, only 95 people graduate. 32% become general officers. So it's just a comparison, the class of 1915, where they always say, well, that's the class there. That had 36%. So, 4% difference. And so this group goes on, and some of the guys you've run into, Weaver from the 8th Division, Robertson from the 2nd Division, Doc Cook, of course, from the 104th and then the 12th Corps, Walton Walker, John S. Wood, Ham Hazlett. I mean, these are all guys that this audience knows because they show up in the.
I assume the Sid Bingham there is the father of the D-Day Sidney Bingham on Omaha, I guess, is he?
Say which one?
Sid Bingham. That would be Sidney Bingham's from D-Day's dad.
Yeah, that's his father. Correct.
Yeah.
That was his roommate. That was his roommate at West Point. So it's a fascinating. And again, I've got letters. I mean, I have only been able to exploit a portion of the letters day by day. What this guy's doing, it's fascinating. It's just absolutely amazing. But sort of one of the themes in the book, and I think it's important to point, one of the themes in the book, and one of the things that bothers me about some biographies or some accounts even of battles, it's like these guys just met each other. This is the most connected group of ever. There's only 95 in this class. The class earlier, and it was smaller. The class after still, it's only 1915 they start having large classes. These guys know each other. By the time he gets to D-Day, by the time he's in Normandy, he knows at least 80%, personally, 80% of all the infantry colonels and generals in the Army. Easily. And we come across these guys time and time again. He's stationed, we'll talk about some more, but there's so many opportunities. So I try to build the connections as I go through them because I'm always amazed when these people keep coming back and recurring, showing up again. So, yeah, just go on.
Yeah.
So where does Tubby come from? Tubby. There he is on the wrestling team right there. So he is, there's no real intercollegiate wrestling back there, but they have a very vibrant wrestling club. Of course, that would eventually turn into a national collegiate wrestling. Very, very club. There he is right there. He's about my size. He's about my and solid as a rock, about 5'9"-ish. And the guy is solid. They call him sometimes being overweight at 170 pounds. I say, my God, please bring me back. But he is built like a rock. And he's also on the football team. Now, West Point football back then, American football, of course. Mm-hmm. American football back then, they played both sides of the ball, sort of like typical English or European football. That changes later on. But he's not on the starting group of players, but he's on the second group. But he's enough that he gets a letter, he's on a thing, and they start calling him Tubby. That sticks with him forever to the point where that's his favorite. I mean, his wife calls him Tubby. Eisenhower calls him Tubby. Everybody except his subordinates, that he's working for him, call him Tubby. So my editor was a little, what? You can't do that. That's politically incorrect. So no, he's Tubby. That's who the guy is. Cool. Let's move on. That is his company, taking a picture. He's assigned to the 30th Infantry Regiment in 1912. It's based in San Francisco at the Presidio. He shows up there, and then he hops a steamer. And the story, again, there's a lot of these little stories I intend to eventually turn into articles. He hops into this steamer, and he runs it from Vancouver, Seattle, all the way north, and the story of how he gets there. I mean, he's in the middle. You can't get there today without going by boat or by airplane. It's in the middle of nowhere. And there they are. And he's got the Delta Company and the 30th Infantry. There are only 2 companies on post. So he has all the extra duties. But the thing that's fascinating about the letters is that he's out there. I mean, you talk about his up there on the side with his the hunting. I mean, they're out there hunting. They go on these hunting trips that are mind-boggling. And just they go away for 2 weeks. They'll hop into a boat and they'll go upstream, and they'll come back with this boat just loaded up with all kinds of wildlife, and they'll be feeding the mess forever. It's just amazing stuff today that it's a rare infantry officer would take away in the middle of winter to go out hunting for 2 weeks in Alaska. That's just and everybody expects it.
And at this time, Steve, would you classify him as being kind of progressive and modern thoughts about warfare, or traditionalist? You know, you mentioned the fact that ancestry, Civil War, or is he kind of an all-rounder?
He was a basic company grade infantry officer. That's what he was. He would fit right in well with the modern infantry guy. He goes to Ranger School and off we go, and fits right into that. I mean, he has counts of training his company out there in the field, and it pretty basic at this level, because we're still talking to lieutenant. So he's at this level. He's basic, hard on how to teach stuff, hands-on kind of stuff. There's a point where he thinks they're going to go to war with Mexico around 1914 or so. He's trying to become a colonel into Oklahoma Volunteers or something. That never happens. But anyway, yeah. And so he's up there. It's a quite interesting environment. You see, there are a couple of ladies. There's a civilian community that supports the post and everything. So he's quite a ladies' man as he's growing up. No question about it. A lot of his letters talk about the women he's meeting, which is a fascinating story. So yeah, let's move on. All right. Okay, yeah. So he becomes the machine gun expert, which is true. I changed slide area. He's the machine gun expert, and there he is. And he starts off. First of all, he goes to one of the interesting things, before World War I, we have this thing called the Plattsburgh Civilian Military Training thing. It's while you guys are over there all knocking heads in the trench lines, is a be prepared movement in the United States. They write about it all the time, but I'm kind of surprised they don't really talk about who's leading the training and who's coordinating the training. Well, it was the 30th Infantry Regiment. And the 30th Infantry, so Barton early on is a trainer, as that's what he starts to do right away. First in 1914-15 up there in the Plattsburgh training camp. And then, of course, when Pancho Villa shows up, they head on south to deal with the Mexican border. He goes to Eagle Camp, to Eagle Pass, which is becoming famous now. I need to get that. It's one of the few places that in Alaska are the 2 places I haven't been where he's been. And so he's down there at Plattsburgh, but through 1916. In 1917, U.S. is now going to war. They bring them north again. He ends up at Madison Barracks, New York, for a while, and then back into Plattsburgh again, where they're doing training. After that, he ends up like Bradley and like Eisenhower, he doesn't go overseas. He stays stateside training. And so he goes down to a place called Camp Hancock, and that's down there in Georgia, Augusta, Georgia. So it's his first experience with Augusta, Georgia. And he loves it. Think about it. He's gone from, it's kind of bleak where he lived in 1908 in Ada, Oklahoma. It's pretty bleak. He goes up to Alaska and freezes his butt off. He goes up to upstate New York and freezes his butt off. And now he's in the South in Augusta, and he really likes it. He really likes it. So that's good for him. So he's down there. Tragedy happens. He has a brother. His brother is enlists as a sergeant. He's home on vacation. You see the picture of the 2 of them down there at the bottom, Percy. And he goes back to Camp Hancock, and a short period later, his father and a lawyer, his father was the judge, a lawyer, to get into a fight. His brother goes out to help, redeem his father's honor, and this guy shoots him dead on the street of Ada. So it's pretty traumatic. One of the themes that happens in here is his brother had married, and soon after he dies, he has a daughter, and so for the rest of his life, Raymond will keep an eye on Barbara Barton and will be a member of family, keep an eye on her, and help eventually fix her up with another Army officer, which is kind of interesting. So good. And of course, then he goes over he goes over to France, and he spends a little bit of time in Tours and in Paris. There's a little scene in my book there where he knocks out a French taxi driver who gave him a hard time, which is kind of fascinating.
Oh, we've all been there. We've all.
I do. I do Uber in Paris.
Yeah.
But he ends up at Ehrenbreitstein outside of Coblentz, and he first is company commander, and then he becomes the battalion commander of the 8th Regiment. Keep my slides up to date. Becomes the battalion commander of the 8th Regiment, and he's up there at Ehrenbreitstein, which is fascinating. In the process, as he's taking command, Pershing ends up, and we're talking now in 1921, October 21. He ends up leading a honor battalion. First to Paris on October 2nd, and then later on October 15th to London. And in both cases, what Pershing is doing is presenting the Congressional Medal of Honor at the tomb of the unknown soldier or unknown warrior. So they do that. Barton organizes and commands the honorific battalion that does that for that event. There they are marching down the streets on the way to in London, which is fascinating. I got a great picture of all these guys when they come across the river and come across the channel. First at the Prince of Wales School, they're all sitting out there with pictures with their helmets on and then their helmets off. It's a fascinating picture. The other thing he does while he's up there is he meets a Red Cross gal, and the Red Cross gal, of course, Claire Fitzpatrick. And then they spelled it Fitzpatrick, and now it later gets pulled together. She was a Red Cross girl. Her and her sister went over at 19 years old, serving in the Red Cross as stenographers. Now, what's fascinating with that, because she ends up going up there in Breitstein to raise money, and that's where Barton ends up meeting her, and they end up having a great little romance. So he goes from there, but he ends up funny because she knew General Pershing. And so all her fellow officers are giving wives are kind of poo-pooing his new wife. Well, she was a working girl, we can't. Yeah, they go to the ball that Holston for Pershing. Pershing walks right up to her, pulls her off on the dance floor, and starts dancing with her for most of the night. Barton had to go up and pull her away. So it's kind of fascinating little story. She was quite a woman in her own right. The sad part, kind of jump ahead. The sad part is after they stopped writing to their parents about his mother died in 43, father a little before that. They stopped writing those letters. So we really don't have a good account. This is what's missing, a good account of what she's doing during the war. And that kind of breaks my heart that we haven't been able to pull that out. We know where she is. We know what she's doing. We know physically where she is, but not a lot of detail. Let's go one more. So the interwar years, he comes back. He remains as battalion commander for a bit. He goes to Fort Screven outside of Savannah. Beautiful place here. We get a chance to get down there. Just beautiful, marvelous. He talks about sitting in these beautiful homes, going out and hearing the wind at night, and walking out and pulling up a bushel of oysters and it's great stuff. Meanwhile, his wife, Claire, she's up in New York dealing with his mother, who is in bad shape. She's very sick, and she's hanging around with her sister, Edna. So here's a little subplot. If you look at this picture on the right hand, there are two young children. There's a guy that's a little guy and a little gal. But there's a guy off on the left side that's got a little bow tie on.
Yep.
That's Edna's son. So for much of his life, he will, because she didn't have any money and she can't take care of him. So for much of those early years in the 20s and 30s, Marshall Kelly is his name, and he will be living with him. So the Bartons are pretty good about taking care of people in the family. So this is a part of the subplot as they're growing up. He takes jobs. Jobs include, again, he first goes to the Fort Leavenworth as a student. Turns down another assignment at West Point. Says, no, I don't want to be a student. I want to be a student. He does that. He becomes the G3 to 7th Corps area, which is a whole strange organization. He's running. His big deal is dealing with the Mississippi floods. I mean, little things as a G3 dealing with the massive flooding in the Mississippi River. So he gets lots of practical hands-on experience. Then he goes back to Leavenworth, and he teaches for 3 years. And again, he's teaching with Clarence Hübner. He's teaching with Clint Cortlandt. I mean, you go down the list of people he runs into. I mean, I have a constant database of the people he runs into and keeps running into. It's pretty amazing.
Because I'm glad you're mentioning that, Steve, because there's sometimes we think of that interwar period, both in the American Army and the British Army and other armies, kind of being a bit stagnant. And it's, we talk about the small size of the army in 1940. And yes, all of that stuff is true. And yes, there could have been more developments in armored warfare and doctrine and stuff. But just to emphasize, as you did, how many people you're getting to know, because it is eventually all going to come down to the interpersonal relationships.
Oh, of course,
that when you're running a combined arms war, which is what World War II ends up becoming, it's all about how you get on. It's how the guy in charge of tanks gets on with the guy in charge of railroads and infantry, and the names you're reeling off that he knows is pretty much the entire U.S. Army generalship in the ETO.
And so again, even up this job, the 7th Corps area up at Omaha, Nebraska, he's flying. He's flying all over the place, because from down to Fort Riley, all places, and they're doing a bunch of things. They're doing ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. They go reserve units, small, but they're there. The regular Army. I mean, it's a massive deal he's dealing with. And then you start talking about this whole humanitarian business with the Mississippi floods. So he's in contact, and lots of practical hands-on experience. CGSC instructor. I mean, the people who come through, to include, by the way, Jane Lawton's Collins, Collins does not like West Point CGSC instructors, CGSS instructors. He says that in his memoirs, and of course, both Clarence Hübner and Raymond Barton will be working for him during the war, which is fascinating stuff, and we'll talk about that later on. But yeah, no, it's interesting. So it's quite an exposure to all kinds of people during that period. He then goes, the next step is the Army War College. And his classmates is Jake Devers. I mean, it's that kind of stuff where you start to get something. It's fascinating. And here's the other thing about Washington. Everybody's there. So at first he's in the War College, and then he's a professor of military science at Georgetown University. So an awful lot of the Army's officers in the interwar period are spending time with reserve units, or they're spending time at ROTC universities. Van Fleet, University of Georgia, University of Florida, for example. They're spending time at all these places, and they all get to meet each other at these annual summer camps, which is almost like a reunion. And because he's in Washington anyway, it's Old Home Week. He writes this in his letter of all the people he knows. It's Pete and Tubby and Chuck and whatever, all these nicknames of all these people. It's an amazing group. By the time we get into the 30s, he's there at Georgetown, 1933 to 36. So it's amazing in this pre-war period. One of the guys that's there was one of his mentors back in Alaska. The guy who was truly, the technical term would be stud muffin, who goes out into the field and comes back with boats load of stuff. He was tough as nails infantryman. I mean, one of the most amazing stories I've ever seen. And he's practically disappeared from the world. Asia Singleton. Asia Singleton, who, by the way, when he gets to Europe, is the commander of the port at Brest.
Wow. And
when he lands, and so that's where Barton lands at Brest, and he spends about a week with Singleton in his brand new car the Army gave him, and they're driving around checking stuff out. And then he comes back. Singleton is up there at working for Marshall and up there at Craig up at Washington. He goes down to a job at Benning to become the coordinator with the Civilian Conservation Corps. The guy running Benning, the infantry school, is Asia Singleton. So now he's in the office working for one of his best friends, and he does that at same thing. He does that in Washington. He's one of his best friends is running the summer camps. So all this connection just keeps showing up.
We had a question from a loyal viewer, Gary August, is how influenced was Barton from the U.S. Army's involvement during World War I, and what did he take from it as an instructor? So you mentioned him teaching. He's obviously been to Europe just after the First World War. Is he like an ideas sponge at this point?
Yeah. Because he's he meets all the first of all he meets all these guys, which is the first thing. They're still having all these founders days, all these West Pointers get together, and so yes, it's a great question. He is learning, and of course the Army. Pete Schifferle and others have done a good piece on that, where the Army is changing their structure away from the old European model, much more to a model of what did we learn in the war? The book that Marshall ends up publishing, Infantry in Battle, that stuff comes up. Yeah, so he's a sponge. The Army's constantly trying to figure out how to do this stuff. So it's really, and if again, you go to Leavenworth, you look at the old documents from the Leavenworth period. I taught there for about 10 years. And so there's a whole lot of that stuff in the libraries where they have where they're transitioning from the pre-war manuals, which are very administrative in the U.S. Army, to very much practical, how do we do stuff? Yeah, so very much he's a sponge. He's learning, a lot of sharing. And again, all the service schools, the guys who go to, everybody knows about the Marshall Infantry School when Marshall was running it, but there's also the artillery school. And these guys are all coming to Leavenworth, but sometimes as instructors, sometimes as students. So this is an incredibly fertile period. And again, I take issue with the thing we talked about earlier. It's not a dead time in the Army. It's an incredibly
I was being devil's advocate there. I mean, so often you see these articles that say things like, and don't forget, the U.S. Army only had 112 tanks in 1940 and that kind of stuff, which isn't incorrect. But the point is, the ingredients are there. There's people like Barton. I'm thinking about McNair, who was doing all sorts of extraordinary things. And of course, Billy Mitchell. And the groundwork is there because the people are there to be able to expand the ideas later. Yes, the tech isn't necessarily there, but the thinking pool is
about it. Yeah, they're limited by resources. They're not necessarily limited by opportunity. And the fact that so many. So if you're not in an active unit, the most likely you are either an instructor, you're an instructor at a military school, you're an instructor at a service school, at the infantry school or the artillery school, or you're an instructor at places like Leavenworth or the Army War College. So the amount of having taught again as a student, as a professor and an officer in an Army school systems. You are totally learning and interacting with your students. These guys are all professionals. The other thing they all learn to do is play golf, and they do it very well. So he goes to Fort Benning. After Screven, he goes to Benning Civilian Conservation Corps, and then he goes first. Let me back up. He goes from Georgetown, Washington, to Benning Civilian Conservation Corps. Then he goes back to Fort Screven. And now he takes command of the entire 8th Infantry Regiment. That was interesting. Now, interesting point out here, while he's there, he spends a couple of weeks in the hospital. And he's in the hospital because the thing that had started bothering him earlier was getting worse from time to time, and this was a stomach ulcer. Right. And the ulcer was causing him lots of problems. And this will ultimately, foreshadowing, this will ultimately be his demise. This ulcer, of course, good stress will kind of make it worse. And none of these guys eat well. They all smoke. They don't drink beer. This is not a beer drinking society. They're all drinking hard liquor, lots of it, and they're not necessarily the most exercise prone group. So it's a hard life. One of the things that struck me as I'm working on this, everybody I write about is younger than me when they die. I mean, it's just they all die, almost all of them. It's crazy stuff. So anyway. He goes there, and now the 8th Regiment, now we're building up 1940. Okay, now we're going to start building up, and let's move up to the next slide.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. So now he goes from the 8th Regiment, and the first thing he ends up doing is during some of the early maneuvers, they're forming the division. The 4th Division will be reactivated, reorganized, and it's going to be reorganized, by the way, as a motorized division. The Army thinks that it's going to be like the Panzer Grenadiers. This is after 1940, and the Germans are running around with these Panzer Grenadier supporting their tank divisions. So it'll be organized as that way. He starts out as its first chief of staff, and he will run it first as the chief of staff. He'll do that, and then in his boss is a guy named Oscar Griswold, another guy that's unsung, who ends up fighting and leading the Corps in Manila. So, you know, Oscar W. Griswold, but that's one of his mentors. Griswold is the division commander. He gets moved over to the 4th Corps, not the 4th area, the actual 4th Army Corps that stood up as commander. And he immediately gets there and fires his chief of staff he thinks is worthless. And he grabs Barton and he brings him right up, because they're now going to do the South Carolina maneuvers. And the South, these things are monitored. I mean, the things I'm amazed throughout the book, from now on throughout the rest of the book, is the amount of supervision these division and corps commanders and regimental commanders have. They spend probably 30% of their time dealing with visitors from higher headquarters. It's amazing. So Griswold knows if he blows this, Marshall and McNair are going to fire him. He's done. His career will come to an end. So he brings on his trusted agent, who is Tubby Barton, brings him on. And you see at the bottom right hand, there's a picture of them during the South Carolina maneuvers down there in the right side. And they have a great team. They get back to Jacksonville after the maneuvers just before Pearl Harbor. And of course, Pearl Harbor breaks. And then we talk about Barton's still a Corps commander, and now they're a Corps chief of staff, and now they're doing all this stuff. He's chief of staff of Third Army is Eisenhower. I mean, they're talking back and forth about what do we need to do. I mean, again, the connections that are here. I mean, Eisenhower and Barton know each other long before they get over there to overseas. So it's one of these things that's always taken place. So now you've got this happening, and the war's going on. And you talk about who you know. Barton's reading the papers. The 4th Division ain't going anywhere, right? The 4th Division ain't going anywhere. The 4th Corps isn't going anywhere. And now the Philippines are taking place. And all of his classmates, whole bunch of them, and people he knows, are over there in Bataan. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff. One of the guys he's working with, his son-in-law is over there in Bataan. And they're sitting around the evening, talking about, you know, what's it going to be like. And so he ends up, in fact, sadly, his son-in-law, his friend's son-in-law will be killed when one of the troop ships is sunk by a U.S. submarine when they're evacuating prisoners over to Formosa. But he does that. And so finally, Griswold, who knew Walt Kruger, who's commanding Third Army at this time, walks on into Kruger's office and said, "Hey, we got to get this guy. We got to get this guy promoted. We got to make it happen." And that's exactly what happened. He gets picked up first, literally told, it blew my mind. He gets called while he's in the middle of Louisiana. He gets called by, gets a telegram from McNair's office, say, "Can you be here tomorrow?" Now, transportation in 1941 was not the greatest thing. So now he's got to go from the backwoods of Louisiana, get down to New Orleans, pick up an airplane, and fly to D.C., and then walk in to be there for the following morning when he has a briefing with McNair and George C. Marshall. So it's pretty impressive stuff. He gets picked up originally as the deputy commander for the 85th Division. And who's the commander? Wade Hazlett, who was stood next to in freaking line back in West Point. I mean, it's incredible stuff. And there you see in the bottom left hand, there's a picture of them going to the transportation school because they got to learn about trucks, which, by the way, is a big deal because guess what? The U.S. Army, it's becoming motorized. Nobody knows how to drive. I mean, who knows how to drive in 1940? Where do you learn that? Most people can't afford cars. So there's a whole big transportation training people to drive thing, which is wild. So there he is on the left. You get Hazlett next to him. You've got Sanders next to him, who becomes another big player, and McKelvey, who will end up taking over the division, the 90th Division he's right there. He's his artillery commander.
Yeah, I'm studying him right now. You're name dropping just about everybody today.
Yeah, they all know each other. They all know each other. Yeah. So anyway, July 42. I mean, in fact, he's still there. He gets back to Benning because that's where the division is kind of working out of. Although they're building what would become Fort Gordon in Augusta. He helped pick that spot, by the way, down there. And now it's Fort Moore, of course, or Fort Eisenhower. And He's now walks into his son-in-law. Okay, it's not really son-in-law. It's Barbara. His brother's son's daughter is married to a Lieutenant Chambers, and he's working for Patton, 2nd Armored Division. He goes walking into the 2nd Armored Division headquarters. Patton and his wife come on up, and they both give him a kiss on his cheek, as only Patton and it would do. And then Patton comes to his house 2 days later and gives him a cup and gives him brigadier stars that are engraved. So congratulations, Tubby. So July 42, he's picked up as commander of the 4th Division. Go ahead and change over. So for the first year and so, they're just maneuvering. They're just maneuvering. And the problem is, in fact, there's on the right hand, they're doing nothing. They're up there. This is they're moving at Fort Dix, where you see a picture of him and a bunch of ladies, Conover models. One of the duties of a division commander to take the visitors around. There he is with the local models taking them around. But he ends up, the division is a motorized division. The Army can't move a motorized division. They can move tanks. They can move infantry. They just don't have enough lift to move them motorized. So in July 42, they decide they go ahead, correction, at December, let me get the years right here, April 43, too many dates, I can't keep them all memorized. April 43, they turn down they decide, nope, it's going to be a regular infantry division, and they send them down to Camp Gordon Johnston, down there on the Gulf, they're not too far from Pensacola, and there they do amphibious training. And there's a picture of these guys, and again, you can see there's Tubby in the front. He's got his artillery commander behind him. That's on the left on the dock. You see a guy with his legs hung over. That is Jim Rodwell, who was his chief of staff and became the 8th Infantry commander later on after Van Fleet. Van Fleet's in there somewhere. I mean, it's that kind of crowd. It's pretty impressive. So they move on. Let's switch on. Hit one more over. So in January they start moving, and by February there they are in Tiverton in Devon, down your neck of the woods, which is across the river, across the channel actually from where you are right now.
Yep.
Fascinating training. They go on out there. That's Cole Priest House in Tiverton, and that was the division commander's division command post. Again, blows my mind, because one of the things I get here now that I hadn't had is a day-by-day diary. Day by day. No one's ever seen this diary. It's been stuck in his grandson's collection forever. And it's pretty amazing. Eventually I'm going to print this thing out. Once I get permission from the family, I'm just going to go ahead and publish it. Maybe with a few other letters and paper stuck in. But there he is, that picture, a very famous picture of him up there in the upper left-hand corner, if people seen it. That's actually on Operation Tiger. That's taken during Operation Tiger, a map that's slapped in sands. The 4th Division, they didn't do well, but it was a good training exercise. I mean, they learned, it's about the 3rd or 4th training exercise they had of actual amphibious stuff. A lot of lessons learned. I don't like that word, but they did learn a lot of lessons, a lot of stuff to fix. But of course, the day after is when the Schnell boat come in from Cherbourg and hit the LCTs with the engineers on board. So it was a bad day. He doesn't mention anything about it in his diary, but that we know that, of course, that's what happened. A lot of good training. The other thing that amazes me is this supervision. Probably 40% of his time here goes up. He has everybody's visits him every day. So one of the myths that comes out of World War II from the Americans, because soldiers say, "Oh, I never saw a commander." That I am absolutely convinced that's crap. They have not seen them, but the commanders saw them.
Yeah.
These guys are in the field all the time, always. I mean, Barton's on the road here every day. Joe, they bump Collins and Barton, and Collins and Barton bump into each other several times just driving around out there. It's amazing. And again, the visitors come rolling on in. All of them come in. One of the interesting guys kicking around is Harold Bull. Harold Bull was with him in Alaska and in San Francisco. Bull will be Eisenhower's G3. So that's what, they talk about connections, right? And Bull will show up again.
Just a quick question for you about
yes, sir.
The way we still talk about, when we talk about the divisions on D-Day during the SIP, we talk about the veteran divisions and the green divisions. And I hate that binary definition because there's this implication that the green divisions, 29th, the 4th, have just kind of finished basic training 6 weeks earlier, been put on a boat and don't know which end of the rifle is the pointy end, and it really grips my shit.
Yeah, and it should.
There's combat experience, of course. The first have got combat experience, the ninth have got combat experience, but they're doing a hell of a lot of training, and they're also getting the ideas directly back. They're coming back from the front. They're getting the ideas from North Africa and Husky and Italy. So does that annoy you that we have this
is probably of course the first division did go to Torch and then go to Sicily, but frankly this division's better trained.
Yeah, exactly.
The first division lost a lot of guys, a lot of veterans, a lot of new people. They may have some staff procedures and stuff, or some things better, but this is, and that's one of the themes later on as we move into the war. This is one of the themes, Paul. These guys knew each other. He'd been training this division. I get all kinds of messages about, hey, these guys aren't up to snuff. Let's fix them. Let's train. This is an incredibly well formed, and he knew every officer. And of course, when you start getting into the captain level, he knew them all personally, and certainly the majors, lieutenant colonel, he knew these guys personally, every single one of them.
Was this an era where they're shuffling people around and trying them in different jobs? Yeah. I mean, my work in the 506 is that they're trying people out. Does he work better in mortars or does he work better in signals? And I'm assuming that similar thing is happening because you're not facing combat, you can have a little bit of flexibility to move people around. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, and that's all. Let me give you one example. One good example is James Van Fleet. They make a lot of noise about James Van Fleet. He was not promoted because his name sounded like Van Vliet, who was another guy, and Marshall didn't want to promote him because and there's a little bit of truth to that. But the bottom line, James Van Fleet didn't go to any of the courses. He's running the ROTC program at Florida, University of Florida, twice, but he's also their coach. He's their football coach. He doesn't care. He's ready to get out of the Army in 1940 and move on. He doesn't care. He's running, and if you look at the records for the Florida Gators, there he is, winning coach for the Gators. So they weren't going to promote this guy anyway, but he's a leader, good God. He is an amazing leader. And so as soon as they get there, as soon as he starts training with him, he's starting to drop word and say, hey, we got to get this guy, got him promoted. And then by the time they're getting ready to go to Europe, he and Marshall are talking about, and he says, hey, let me do this D-Day thing. By the way, one thing I found out in his medical records is like in May 1940, in early 1944, or 43, April or May, he actually takes a secret trip to Europe and talks about what's taken place. And I never found that anywhere. And he says he went over before they went to Gordon Johnston down there in the so I found that pretty fascinating. But anyway, these guys do a lot of serious training. He does. The other guy that shows up here, of course, is Ted Roosevelt. And we could talk all day about Ted Roosevelt. Ted Roosevelt is Bradley's pain in the ass. Okay, he'd been fired down there in Sicily. He's now getting out of the hospital, and he knows everybody who's a politician, and he's writing letters back. So Bradley's got to get him into the field. And now they really don't necessarily want to put him in anything yet. So they give him to Barton. Bradley gives him to Collins, and Collins brings him down to Barton and say, hey, here you go. And Barton goes, crap, I have this freaking prima donna that's going to work for me. You talk about combat experience, though. They immediately become incredibly fast friends. And the reason they become so friendly is Barton's got 2 years in command, but no combat time. Ted Roosevelt is probably, I'm still checking it, but I can't find out anybody else, is the most decorated U.S. general officer in the service in Europe. He's got more decorations than anyone else, by far. So he has that combat experience, and Barton needs it. And so jumping ahead, that's seen in The Longest Day. The reason Barton doesn't want Roosevelt to go to shore in the first wave is he needs him. He needs him to be his eyes and ears, which he is, wanders. He has no job. He's an extra general. He's riding around everywhere and has access to everything. He's beautiful. And every night, Roosevelt comes on back, and he and Tubby sit back in headquarters and what'd you learn today? And it's that kind of thing. He does not want him to get killed on the first wave going ashore in D-Day. Roosevelt, however, is that kind of guy. He says, nope, I'm going ashore. And Barton said, all right, go ahead and do it. Anyway, next slide.
Hang on. There we go. Yep.
There we go. Comes ashore, the Bayfield, the great photograph of Barton and Roosevelt. I talk about in some detail about that event where he's trying to tell what Barton is trying to do there is tell his armored guy where he wants him to go. At the same time, Roosevelt has just come back from everywhere on the front and within a sector, and he wants to tell Barton everything. So Barton's trying to do stuff, and then just then his aide comes up and says, "Hey, boss, we got to take a picture." So Barton is irritated as heck in that picture. Of course, he later on says it's the best picture he had. It's glad he had it. So anyway, that clears up. Roosevelt is seen by everybody. One of the other misconceptions is that Roosevelt makes the decision. As you know, the 4th Division lands a little far north, a little far south, rather, of its original landing place. They talk about Roosevelt makes that decision. No, he doesn't. Let's clarify. The commander of the assault force is James Van Fleet.
Yep.
That's the guy that makes the decision. Roosevelt, who has no job, when the 2 battalion commanders are up there trying to figure out what's going on, Roosevelt's popping his head up and goes, uh-oh, we're in the wrong place. But he sees the landmark. So once he comes back down, he's able to go and talk to the battalion commanders. And then, of course, they communicate to Van Fleet, which says, let's just do it here. Van Fleet communicates to Barton. Bing, 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 takes place. So then all the rest of the 4th Division, and they don't miss a beat. You know, one of the stories is no plan survives first contact with the enemy. This is proof that's crap. Because they'd survived it. Once they figured out what they were doing, they took the plan and executed, made adjustment. It's a plan, and they made the changes. It worked out brilliantly. As I write in the article I had published in Army Magazine 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, this was his easiest day of combat. This was Barton's easiest day of combat. So it only goes downhill. After that, of course, they're going north, and it becomes a slugfest.
Yeah.
We okay for time? How are we doing?
Yeah, no, I'm loving it. It's just I'm hanging off every word, enjoying it.
That is Barton's map. That is actually was a map he carried, by the way, right? Little circles, stuff like that. There's, you know, they fight their way up. Montsburg is that first string of circles over there. They hold that line while Collins, who was fighting in 3 directions at once, is now moving out to cut the peninsula to the west and move the airborne to take Carentan down, the 101st take Carentan to the south. Because Collins is fighting in 3 directions at once. And that is quite a synchronization operation. I mean, this is a big deal, and he pulls it off pretty well.
And it's a shame that we talk a little about the Kinnerville Ridge, which is right at the bottom of your map there, because we talk about the 7th Corps supporting the 82nd pushing west, which of course is very important, and we can't ignore that. But as you say there, they're advancing in 3 directions, and I think that push up the beach there when they're losing all those people, what is it, a third of the division killed or wounded in 3 weeks? It's just so overlooked.
By the end of July, the 4th Division had 5,451 casualties. By the end of June, 5,000. That is, given the strength of rifle companies, that's 58% of the division are killed, wounded, or captured. That's just till June.
Yeah. When anyone ever says to me, "Oh, the 4th Division had an easy D-Day," I always add comma, but a shit June.
But so then they fight all the way up the way. I mean, and Barton loses a bunch of these trusted. His deputy commander is Barber, Brigadier General Barber, Hal Barber, and he ends up wearing out. He has to go. Roosevelt was acting as his deputy commander at that point. He was going to get a division all the way up there to take the Cher. The fighting around Cherbourg is brutal, just absolutely brutal. And again, these are things that just nobody pays attention to. I mean, every one of those is a separate action that someday I hope to get back in to just look at it from the division's perspective.
Brutal. I have to ask you, Steve, does Barton say anything either at the time or later about whether or not that whole push up the Cotentin was really, really worth it. Because I'm beginning to think this is a massive rabbit hole. But I'm beginning to think that, you know, just cut across the peninsula and let Cherbourg kind of wither on the vine. It was never going to be the big, you know, focus on the other port. I don't know. I just feel
he never says it. That was above his pay grade. You know, that was above his pay grade.
To me, it just delays everything. It delays the push into Saint Lo. It delays because everything's going to
same thing with going out to Brest. It's the same thing.
Brest and Saint Malo and Brest, same thing.
One of the things that's imperative to keep in mind again is division command. Bart, you know, they fired division again. McKelvey gets fired. Collins fired. Collins fires people, right? And Collins doesn't necessarily like Barton, so they get fired. And so Barton's always looking over his shoulder. He's up there. He knows if he doesn't produce, he's gone. He knows.
Never thought about that. That's a very good point. Well, the 90th go through 4 commanders in almost as many weeks, isn't it? So, and yeah, Collins is quick on the trigger, isn't he?
Well, Collins, you got to remember, Collins is a special guy. That's a whole other talk. Collins, his brother, was General Pershing's aide. And people forget that. He was Pershing's aide. Collins' brother picks Marshall to be Pershing's aide. I mean, the connection is incredibly tight. Collins goes to the best military, more schools, better schools. He has the best interwar career of any officer in the Army. Fascinating. So he's the golden boy. So
I am a fan, to be fair.
I am not a fan. We can have this conversation.
We'll schedule that one.
We'll schedule that in March. We'll get out some brew. But so anyway, continuing on, they get up there to Cherbourg, and Ted Roosevelt becomes mayor of Cherbourg for a while until they get it under control. What I don't have on this map, and is a whole other thing, is the fighting southwest of Carentan. It's a little area around Santé, and I know you've been in that area. It's a
Santenay and up towards Perrier. Yeah, no shit.
That is a swamp.
Yeah.
That is a horrible swamp. And again, the casualties are ungodly in that period of time. By the end of July, the total losses for this division are 8,714. 8,000. That is 93% of the freaking riflemen, and they're all riflemen. So it's amazing. I mean, not to mention the commanders. I mean, the battalion commanders, battalion executive officers to go down is just mind-boggling.
I like taking my groups on the drive from Carentan to Perrier, which takes about 15 minutes in a bus, 20 minutes maybe. And I explain, that's a month. That's basically a month. For the 4th, the 83rd, the other unit, 2nd Armored are in the area there. That's down just a straight road with swamps either side, and German Fallschirmjäger and German SS and others who just don't want to give that area up. It's another massively unsung part of the Normandy campaign. Yeah,
it's horrible. It's horrible. Rolling on, so we don't have to do this in 2 parts.
Yeah. Keep going.
The 4th Division's at the point. It wasn't even supposed to be in the mix because it was resting. Collins says, no, we need the 4th Division. By the way, Collins rated, on his efficiency report, Collins rated Barton as average. He got the worst efficiency report he had ever had, he got from Joe Collins. This is after D-Day and Cherbourg.
Wow. What, worse than the 90th?
Well, probably not. No, that's probably in the bottom half, I suspect.
Wow.
Yeah, again, Collins did not like Barton. Part of it was Barton's mentor was the guy that threw him out of the Pacific, and I think they kind of figured that out.
Well, I'm loving all this inner politics. So
a couple quick things. Again, they take the lead, the drive down south. They're right there at the point of contact on Operation Cobra. The 22nd Regiment's actually overworking, I think, 3rd Armor. But a couple things happen just before it kicks off. Ernest Hemingway shows up, and he showed up just after he learned that Paddy Flint, who's the guy down the left-hand corner, who was his best friend and actually worked for him a couple of times, he was killed. Paddy Flint, which was pretty sad. So Hemingway had no time Barton had no time for Hemingway, gave him to Ted Roosevelt's aide, who had now was out of job, and gave it to him. And so Stevenson and Roosevelt went ronding around. Stevenson's diary we'd love to see. Anyway, they break on through the fighting around Mortain, down there just north of Mortain, St. Barthélemy. I mean, that's just another brutal. In just 1 week, 1 week of fighting, the division lost almost 2,000 soldiers. 1 week, 7 days fighting just around Mortain. I mean, think about it. That's a freaking rifle. That isn't a regiment worth of rifle. Gone in a week. I mean, it's mind freaking boggling. In fact, the 12th Regiment, 3rd Battalion, 12th Regiment, they actually have a mutiny when they say we're not getting up. They have Barton has to deal with that later. So, let's move on. I know we're rushing this, but then they go to Paris. Just so we know, Paris was liberated not just by the French. This was a U.S. Army 5th Corps operation coordinated by 1st Army, who, by the way, Bradley would not let Patton into Paris, refused to give Patton any, it let him go into Paris. He gave it to his buddy Courtney Hodges' 1st Army, and it was a 5th Corps led by Eisenhower's good study buddy and work plans guy, Giraud. It was a core operation. I mean, this isn't I'm working on this project now. It's amazing the amount of effort that was put in to get that 2nd Division and the 4th Division into that city. And by the way, there were no Germans there, so it was pretty damn easy. Compared to what the 4th Division had been fighting the previous weeks, this was a cake. There was nothing there. So
that's if there's any unit that deserves a bit of a parade, it's the 4th Division after what they've been through since, yeah, okay. I'm not saying the French didn't also deserve it, but, the 4th.
French, French got there a little late. We could talk about that division later. The interesting, it's an interesting piece, but to this day, and I'm actually working with some of my French friends in French government to help fix this. There's no marker in Paris to the 4th Division to this day. And by the way, the 4th Division occupies the eastern half of Paris. And by the way, the crossings of the Seine River southeast of Paris and the airfields to the south. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and it gets no credit whatsoever. But what the heck? But there's Barton, upper right hand. There's Barton, Hodges, and Bradley at the Victory Parade on the 29th. There they are, standing up there on the Bailey Bridge. And then they move rather quickly. They go north, and then they cross the river. And there's Barton crossing the river. First general officer, American general officer, to cross into Germany.
Wow.
Wow. In September 20th, he goes to the hospital. This is big. 2 weeks in the hospital in Paris. 2 weeks. So first Harold Bull comes down to take, he's supposed to be there 6 weeks, by the way. He's supposed to be there 6 weeks recovering. Bull comes down, his old friend, takes command for 2 weeks. And then the guy who had been the 8th Regiment commander, who had moved on, James Van Fleet, comes up, and he's taking command. And he's passing out bottles of booze to his new regiment, his regimental commanders, and saying, "I'm here." Yeah, Barton talks his way back into the division. So Van Fleet's in command for about 4 days. Barton's back. Had Barton followed orders and not politic to get back, I'm convinced Barton would have become a corps commander, in spite of Collins's report. He was well regarded by everybody in the chain. He would have become a corps commander. Instead, by going back, and that would have been Van Fleet in the Hurtgen Forest. It wouldn't have been Barton. Instead of going back, he ends up going back to the 4th Division and will end up in the Hurtgen. Fair enough. Let's jump ahead. This is a cesspool. This is my project after Paris. This is an absolute. This shows this is actually the division map behind it. And you can look, you notice that there's something that's strange about it. And that's because you have 2 groups of troops. This is the most dysfunctional attack I've ever seen. And I taught tactics at Leavenworth. This is incredibly dysfunctional, and it's dysfunctional by direction of the Corps and Army commander. And it's a horrendous. They throw the 12th Regiment in to support the 28th Division, and it gets chopped up and is combat ineffective for 2 weeks. The other two regiments just get chopped and chopped up. Again, we're talking again 2 weeks, 5,000 killed and wounded, 5,000 American soldiers killed and wounded, and another, by the way, 2,000 non-battle casualties. It was total. And Barton's visited every day by the Corps commander at least once, and almost every day by the Army commander at least once. And it's just freaking brutal. There's no other way to describe it.
And does he talk about that in the correspondence and his diary, or is he always the professional who just?
He is always the professional, and I'm picking up more and more from others about like his aide and others about what he is. Hemingway talks about it during Cobra. Hemingway talks about Barton on his back, suffering from pains. It is truck, suffering from the pain he receives. In that period of time. It's just horrible. It's just horrible.
Because it is interesting, in that period of the war, there are certain general officers and others who do have a bit of a rant. They do, as we say in England, throw their teddy out of their pram a little bit and get a bit of attention and get a bit. But if sometimes you can be too disciplined for your own good, aren't you? And if he hasn't got the support of Collins, which obviously he didn't have, he would have jeopardized his own career to kind of be what the fuck are we doing in the Hurtgen kind of just get on with it.
Yeah, nobody and all these guys go in there, and there was some fight. I mean, Hodges is another one. Hodges reminds me of the rifle range instructor back in old basic training. Are you ready on the right? Ready to the left? Yeah. March forward. I mean, there's no maneuver involved. And these guys violate going into Hurtgen Forest. Again, I don't want to drag this. Every freaking military principle of reconnaissance, massing forces, concentration, economy, they violate all of them.
Yeah, every lesson the Americans have learned since Normandy, they forget.
They've all been taught. They taught it at school, and they violate every one. This is well beyond the scope of this talk. But anyway,
it is just for a couple of minutes. Is it people guilty of thinking that we've got the Germans on the run and the war? Is it kind of the same kind of spirit that gets
at the higher level?
Garden?
At the Eisenhower-Bradley level, they absolutely do, and of course they'll come to bite them because of this fight, the Germans are able to build up for the Ardennes counteroffensive. Yeah. If they'd actually been able to move around, maneuver in the north around this mass, which we could talk about that sometime. They would have been on the Rhine River. It would have
let's do it. Come back in December and we'll do Hurtgen.
Yeah, this is part of, by the way, Operation Queen, which is another incredibly poorly planned and executed thing. So anyway, we should move on. We could talk about every one of these for hours, man. Off to the Bulge. They send him down southeast of Luxembourg to rest. What a good idea. Just as the Germans break on in mid-December and the Gulf, and he ends up, the 4th Division ends up running the right flank, essentially of the Bulge. They hold that essentially the left shoulder of the German attack down there in the south. Barton thinks he's protecting Luxembourg, and he sort of is, but that wasn't an objective. That was just the General Brandenburger's assault down there to move in. He's sick as can be. He's irritating his subordinates. You can see his regimental commanders are ticked off at him. I mean, he's been forcing Collins before that has been forcing him to do decisions in Hurtgen. And he doesn't blame. Barton doesn't blame his boss. He takes it. He says, "Oh, we got to do this." And and he kind of, although he's arguing with Collins a lot, but he's not passing it on down to his subordinates. So. The subordinates figure, Barton's the bad guy, and some of that he is because he's really not healthy. He's very sick.
And it's, I know it's another rabbit hole, but you're talking about the incredible losses of the men below his command, but this is obviously having a massive effect on his ulcer and his own mental health and his own physical. This whole idea of generals don't really have they're not the ones with the cold feet. They're not the ones out in the rain.
Big time PTSD, and his granddaughter talks to me a lot about how he and his wife were fighting a lot when they got home, and there was no reason for that. So anyway, he decides he's sick. He turns in his said, "I'm fine." They're just telling him, Milken and Bradley are telling him, "When you're ready, let me know." And he goes, "I got to get out." And he finally goes home, and he comes back to the States. We go ahead and flip this sucker now. There we go. Yeah, so he's back to the States. He hangs out for a while, does some honorific things. Some visits, nothing special. Of course, in fact, especially goes to a retirement board right after Europe, and no problem, medically retired, no problem at all. I've got the entire retirement board to include all the medical stuff and all the testimony, and it's pretty fascinating. The dude's sick. He's really sick, and he just doesn't want to let it go, And there are a number of those guys like that over there that were like that. His good friend, Richard Gilbert, was another one. Doc Gilbert, Corps, he had to come out, couldn't do it, couldn't go anymore. Bill Weaver, another one. None of these guys go down. They just can't. I think John Wood, they just can't stand it. 6 months of combat, that kind of combat. This, unlike the Band of Brothers, this unit doesn't come out of the line. There are no vacations.
And I guess their age is coming back. Some of these general officers, they're in their 50s and 60s, and that all that amount of sleeping in cots and moving all the time and being damp and stress, it's gonna the physical toll is enormous.
Yeah. So then he moves. Let's move on. Next one, we can hopefully get some questions done. Moves to Augusta. He ends up becoming moves to Jacksonville, is where he and his wife stayed. Then they move on up to Augusta. And here we see his son was a West Point RO, became a decorated Korean Air Force pilot, flying the Sabres against Bigs during the Korean War. His daughter, he's up here on his left, see his daughter on his arm, with his right arm around his daughter. Just so quite a decent. Rocky down there in his right hand, little kid at table. That's one of his grandchildren who I'm in contact with. Great family, great people. Down below, you see Eisenhower and Barton and Giroux. They go back for the first 10-year anniversary of D-Day. They go back that's the first 10-year anniversary of D-Day, and Barton's back there on that trip. So it's when the cemetery is still being rebuilt. So go ahead, one more. There he is, February 27th. Find it dying. There we have a picture giving the flag to his wife Claire. Next to him is son Rocky, RO, Raymond O, but they call him RO, and his sister Claire. And then behind him are other members of the family. Barbara Barton back there is one of them, who's that daughter of Percy. So there they are. And one more. And there he is, buried. He's got, unlike most American generals, he's a very unimpressive little grave down there, headstone. That's it. Right there, where the little flag is. There's a monument. Barton Field at now Fort Eisenhower is named for him. And you look again on the right, look downtown Augusta. There's another plaque for him. And just a couple of years ago, through some politicking on my part, I was able to get Raymond O. Barton incorporated into the Command General Staff College's Hall of Fame. So he's getting posted up there now, along with Huberter's picture. They're both up there, along with Collins and Giroux. They're all up there together. So that's it, my friend.
Well, and there's your book for those who haven't seen it yet. And we'll the links are in there below. But well, basically, we'll invite you back in December. But why is it when he is in so many pivotal battles? I mean, and knows so many people. I don't really remember him coming up much in other people's biographies, except just as a name check. And the 4th Division was commanded by Barton. Obviously, Collins didn't like him, but
no, Collins didn't like him.
But do you have a reason why he doesn't seem to come up in people's memoirs? Was he not memorable? Did people just not want to stir the pot? What?
He's it's like the chief of staff. I mean, Richard McKee. How many people in this group know Richard McKee?
Yeah, true.
How many people know who the Corps commander is for the 5th Corps? I mean, who the chief of staff is for the 5th Corps? Henry Matchett. I mean, these are guys that are unsung heroes of the war. They're the unsung. They're doing the job. Most division commanders, Sam Wyke, Robbie Robertson. I mean, these guys are the unsung heroes. The division commanders, these colonels and brigadiers and major generals are out there. They're doing it. Ain't Patton, and it's not Bradley, and it's none of these freaking high rollers. It's these freaking division commanders and regimental commanders and staff officers. Yeah. I mean, the reason Collins looks good is because staff officers are making him look good.
Well, did he get offered speaking engagements and turn them down? Was he invited to go and speak at West Point?
In Augusta. I don't think he was invited anywhere. Augusta, pretty much he stayed in Augusta as far as I can figure out. I'm going to do some more work on that. I'm going to be down in Augusta in February to do a talk down there at the Augusta Museum. And I want to do a little more digging to see what other stuff. But basically, what I can find out is very local, very low key, work with the Chamber of Commerce. supported Eisenhower during his election, that kind of stuff, and not a lot of no.
The irony is that if you're someone who performs at 7 or 8 out of 10 all the way through your career, or you're a tank that is a 7 out of 8 out of 10, no one talks about you. You've got to be either hitting 1s or 10s. If you have big disasters, people write about you, and if you have some major thing you pull off that's amazing, people write about you. But if you're just there, you know, like whether it's your football or my football, if you're just one of those players that gets a 7 every game, you don't get the books written about you. You've got to be making headlines.
And Tubby Barton Frankfurt, I think he's an 8 or a 9. I mean, I mean, every mission he was given, he accomplished. He actually accomplishes his mission in Hurtgen in spite of overwhelming freaking odds, unbelievable odds. They get to where they were supposed to, where the division was supposed to go. Unbelievable.
There's not many units that can say that in the Hurtgen.
By the way, let me tell you how bad it was in the Hurtgen. 4 of its soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor. 4 for that 2-week period. 2 weeks, 4 medals of honor. Find out how many of those there are.
Yeah. Well, so Steve, we'll leave it there, and I will invite you back, and we'll do a dissection if you want to of the Hurtgen, or we'll look at the September-October period, have some spitballing about what the other options were and how does the Hurtgen affect the Ardennes. If you're up for that, I'll definitely have you back.
We'll work something out.
Brilliant. Well, folks, you know what to do. Buy the book. Some of you said you've already bought it already. Tomorrow, I've got an earlier show. Christopher Jarry is coming on to talk about his father's book, 18 Platoon. If you're British like me and you grew up with 18 Platoon, I describe 18 Platoon as being the British with the old breed. It's that combat classic. So we're talking with Christopher about his dad's legacy tomorrow. Then we've got more stuff coming your way. Click like and subscribe. Buy my guest books. But at the moment, this is Paul Woodhead for World War II TV saying I will see you all again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Bye.